Okay, chapter 19. Know who you're dealing with. Do not offend the wrong person. Now, this sounds very much like chapter 1, Never Outshine the Master. But let's go back. And I notice this book is very repetitive. 48 Laws of Power by this green guy, Robert Greene. He's mean, whatever. Okay, anyways. Know who you're dealing with. Do not offend the wrong person. There are many different kinds of people in the world, and you can never assume that everyone will react to your strategies in the same way. Deceive or outmaneuver some people, and they will spend the rest of their lives seeking revenge. They are wolves in lamb's clothing. Choose your victims and opponents carefully, then never offend or deceive the wrong person. And I would be the wrong person. But anyway, continue. In your rise to power, you will come across many breeds of opponents, sucker and victim. The highest form of the art of power is the ability to distinguish the wolves from the lambs, the foxes from the hares, and the hawks from the vultures. If you make this distinction well, you will succeed without needing to coerce anyone too much. But if you deal blindly with whomever crosses your path, you will have a life of distant sorrow, if you even live that long. Being able to recognize types of people and to act accordingly is critical. The following are 5 most dangerous, difficult types of marks in the jungle, as identified by artists Kun and otherwise of the past. Okay. The arrogant and proud man. Although he may initially disguise it, this man's touchy pride makes him very dangerous. And any perceived slight will lead to a vengeance of overwhelmed violence. You may say to yourself, but I only said such and such at a party where everyone else was drunk. It does not matter. This is no sanity behind his reaction. So do not waste time trying to figure him out. If at any point in your dealing with a person you sense oversensitive or an overactive pride, flee. Whatever you are hoping for from him isn't worth it. The hopelessly innocent man. This man is related to the proud and arrogant type, but is less violent and harder to spot. His ego is fragile, his sense of self insecure. And if he feels deceived or tricked, the hunt will simmer. He will attack you in bites that will take forever to give enough for you to notice. If you find you have deceived or harmed such a man, disappear for a long time. Do not stay around him, or he will nibble you to death. Mr. Suspicious. Any variant on the breeds above, this is a future Joe Stalin. He sees what he wants to see, usually the worst, in other people and imagines that everyone is after him. Mr. Suspicious is in fact the least dangerous of the 3. Genuinely unbalanced, he is easy to deceive, just as Stalin himself, and was constantly deceived. Play on his suspicion nature to get him to turn against other people. But if you do become the target of his suspicion, watch out. The serpent with long memory. If hurt or deceived, this man will show no anger on the surface. He will calculate and wait. Then when he is in a position to turn the tables, he will exact a revenge marked by cold-blooded shrewdness. Recognize this man by his calculation and cunning in the different areas of his life. He is usually cold and unaffectionate. Be doubly careful of this snake. If you have somehow injured him, either crush him completely or get him out of your sight. The plain, unassuming, and often unintelligent man. Ah, your ears prick up when you find such a tempting victim. But this man is a lot harder to deceive than you imagine. Falling for a ruse often takes intelligence and imagination, a sense of the possible rewards. The blunt man will not take the bait because he does not recognize it. He is that unaware. The danger with this man is not that he will harm you or seek revenge, but merely that he will waste your time, energy, resources, and even your sanity in trying to deceive him. Have a test ready for a mark, a joke, a story. If his reaction is utterly literal, this the type you are dealing with. Continue at your own risk. In the early part of the 13th century, Muhammad, the Shah of Wars, managed after many wars to forge a huge empire extending west to present-day Turkey and South Afghanistan. The empire's center was the great Asian capital of Samarkand. The Shah had a powerful, well-trained army and could mobilize 200,000 warriors within days. In 1912, Muhammad received an embassy from a new tribal leader to the east, G. Khan. The embassy included all sorts of gifts to the great Muhammad, representing the finest goods from Khan, small but growing Mongol Empire. Khan wanted to reopen the Silk Route to Europe and offered to share it with Muhammad while promising peace between these two empires. Muhammad did not know this upstart from the East, who it seemed to him was extremely arrogant and tried to talk as an equal to one so clearly his superior. He ignored Khan's offer. Khan tried again. This time he sent a caravan of 100 camels filled with the rarest articles and he had plundered from China. Before the caravan reached Muhammad, however, Inaklik, the governor of a region bordering Samarkand, seized him for himself and executed its leaders. Stealing again. Khan was sure that this was a mistake, and Inachik had acted without Muhammad's approval. He sent yet another mission to Muhammad, reiterating his offer and asking that the governor be punished. This time, Muhammad himself had one of the ambassadors beheaded and sent the other two back with shaved heads, a horrifying insult to Mongol code of honor. Khan sent a message to Shah: "You have chosen war. What will happen, and what is to be, we know not, only God knows." Mobilizing his forces in 1212, he attacked Inachik province. When he seized the capital, captured the governor, and ordered him executed by molten silver poured in his eyes and ears. Ooh. Over the next year, Khan led a series of guerrilla-like campaigns against Shah's much larger army. His method was totally novel for the time. His soldiers could move very fast on horseback and had mastered the art of firing with bow and arrow while mounted. The speed and flexibility of his forces allowed him to deceive Muhammad as to his intuitions and the direction of his movements. Eventually, he managed first to surround Samarkand, then seize it. Muhammad fled and a year later died, his vast empire broken and destroyed. Khan was sole master of Samarkand the Silk Route, and the most northern Asia. Never assume that the person you are dealing with is weaker or less important than you are. Some men are slow to take offense, which may make you judge the thickness of their skin and fail to worry about insulting them. But should you offend their honor and their pride, they will overwhelm you with a violence that seems sudden and extreme given their slowness to anger. If you want to turn people down, it is best to do so politely and respectfully, even if you feel their request is impudent or their offer ridiculous. Never reject them with an insult until you know them better. You may be dealing with a con. In the late 1910s, some of the best swindlers in America formed a con. Okay. In 1910, some of the best swindlers in America formed a con artist ring based in Denver, Colorado. In the winter months, they would spread across the southern states, plying their trade. In 1920, Joe Ferre, a leader of the ring, was working his way through Texas, making hundreds and thousands of dollars with classic con games. In Fort Worth, he met a sucker named J. Frank Norfleet, a cattleman who owned a large ranch. Norfleet fell for the con. Convinced of the riches to come, he emptied his bank account of $45,000 and handed it over to Ferry and his confederates. A few days later, they gave him his millions, which turned out to be a few good dollars wrapped around a pack of newspaper clippings. Ferry and his men had worked such cons 100 times before, and the sucker was usually so embarrassed he quietly learned his lesson and accepted the loss. But Norfleet was not like other suckers. He went to the police, who told him there was little they could do. Then I'll go after those people myself. Norfleet told the detectives, I'll get them too if it takes the rest of my life. His wife took over the ranch as Norfleet scoured the country looking for others who had been fleeced in the same gang. One such sucker came forward, and the two men identified one of the con artists in San Francisco and managed to get him locked up. The man committed suicide rather than face a long term in prison. Norfleet kept going. He tracked down another of the con artists in Montana, roped him like a calf, and dragged him through muddy streets to the town jail. He traveled not only across the country, but to England, Canada, and Mexico in search for Joe. And also Fury right-hand man W.B. Spencer. Finding Spencer in Montreal, Norfleet chased him through the streets. Spencer escaped, but the rancher stayed on his trail and caught up with him in Salt Lake City. Preferring the mercy of the law to Norfleet's wrath, Spencer turned himself in. Norfleet found Fury in Jacksonville, Florida, and personally hauled him off to face justice in Texas. But he wouldn't stop there. He continued to Denver, determined to break up the entire ring, spending not only large sums of money, but another year of his life in the pursuit. He managed to put all of the con ringleaders behind bars. Even some he didn't catch had grown so terrified of him, they too turned themselves in. After years of hunting, Norfleet had single-handedly destroyed the country's largest confederation of con artists. The effort bankrupted him and ruined his marriage, but he died a satisfied man. Most men accept the humiliation of being conned with a sense of resignation. They learn their lesson, recognizing that there is no such thing as a free lunch and that they have usually been brought down by their own greed for easy money. Some, however, refuse to take their medicine. Instead of reflecting on their gullibility, and they see themselves as totally innocent victims. Men like this may seem to be crusaders for justice and honesty, but they are actually immoderately insecure. Being fooled, being conned, has activated their self-doubt, and they are desperate to repair the damage. Where the mortgage of Norfleet's ranch, the collapse of his marriage, and the years of borrowing money and living in a cheap hotel worth his revenge, overcoming their embarrassment is worth any price. All people have insecurities, and often the best way to deceive a sucker is to play upon his insecurities. But in the realm of power, everything is a question of degree, and the person who is decidedly more insecure than the average mortal represents great danger. Be warned, if you practice deception or trickery of any sort, study your mark well. Some people's insecurities and ego's fragility cannot tolerate the slightest offense. To see if you are dealing with such a type, test them first. Make say a mild joke to their expense. A confident person will laugh. An overly insecure one will react as if personally insulted. If you suspect you are dealing with this type, find another victim. Why he trying to teach people how to find a victim? But anyway, in the 5th century BC, Chunger, the prince of Qing in present-day China, had been forced to exile. He lived modestly, even sometimes in poverty, waiting for the time when he could return home and resume his princely life. Once he passed through the state of Chang, where the ruler, not knowing who he was, treated him rudely. The ruler, Mr. Shu Chang, saw this and said, "This man is a worthy prince. May your highness treat him with great courtesy and therefore place him under an obligation." But the ruler, able to see only the prince's lowly station, ignored this advice and insulted the prince again. Shu Chang again warned his master, saying, "If your highness cannot treat Chu with courtesy, you should put him to death to avoid calamity in the future." The ruler only scoffed. Years later, the prince was finally able to return home. His circumstances greatly changed. He did not forget who had been kind to him and who had been insolent. During his years of poverty, least of all did he forget his treatment at the hands of the ruler of Chang. At his first opportunity, he assembled a vast army and marched on Chang, taking 8 cities, destroying the kingdom, and sending the ruler into exile of his own. You can never be sure who you are dealing with. A man is of little importance and means today can be a person of power tomorrow. We forget a lot in our lives, but we rarely forget an insult. How was the ruler of Chang to know Prince Chung was an ambitious, calculating, cunning type, a serpent with a long memory? There was really no way for him to know, you may say, but since there was no way, it would have been better not to attempt the fate by finding out. There is nothing to be gained by insulting a person unnecessarily. Swallow the impulse to offend, even if the person seems weak. The satisfaction is meager compared to the danger that someday he or she will be in a position to hurt you. The year of 1920 had been a particularly bad one for American art dealers, big buyers. The robber baron generation of the previous century were getting to an age where they were dying off like flies, and new millionaires had emerged to take their place. Things were so bad that a number of the major dealers decided to pool their resources in unheard of events since art dealers usually get along like cats and dogs. Joseph Duveen, art dealer to the richest tycoons of America, was suffering more than others that year, so he decided to go along with this alliance. The group now consisted of the five biggest dealers in the country. Looking around for a new client, they decided that their best hope was Henry Ford, then the wealthiest man in America. Ford had yet to venture into the art market. He was such a big target that it made sense for them to work together. The dealers decided to assemble a list, the 100 greatest paintings in the world, all of which they happened to have in stock, and to offer the lot of them to Ford. With one purchase, he could make himself the world's greatest collector. The consortium worked for weeks to produce magnificent objects, a 3-volume set of books containing beautiful reproduction of the paintings, as well as scholarly texts accompanying each picture. Next, they made a personal visit to Ford at his home in Dearborn, Michigan. There, they were surprised by the simplicity of his house. Mr. Ford was obviously an extremely unaffected man. Ford received them in his study. Looking through the book, he expressed astonishment and delight. The excited dealer imagining the millions of dollars they would shortly flow into their coffers. Finally, however, Ford looked up from the book and said, "Gentlemen, beautiful books like these, with beautiful colors, pictures like these, must cost an awful lot." But Ford exclaimed, "Duveen, we don't expect you to buy these books. We got them up especially for you, to show you the pictures. These books are present to you." Ford seemed puzzled. "Gentlemen," he said, "it is extremely nice of you, but I really don't see how I can accept beautiful, expensive present like this from strangers." Devine explained to Ford that the reproduction in the book showed paintings that had hoped to sell him. Ford finally understood. "But gentlemen," he exclaimed, "what would I want with the original pictures when the ones right here in these books are so beautiful?" Joseph Devine prided himself on studying his victims and clients in advance, figuring out their weaknesses and their peculiarities of their taste before he ever met them. He was driven by desperation to drop this tactic just once in his assault on Henry Ford. It took him months to recover from his misjudgment, both mentally and monetarily. Ford was unassuming, plain man type who just isn't worth the bother. He was the incarnation of those literal-minded folk who do not possess enough imagination to be deceived. From then on, Devine saved his energies for the Mellons and the Morgans of the world. Men crafty enough for him to entrap in his snares. Keys to power. The ability to measure people and to know who you're dealing with is the most important skill of all in gathering and conserving power. Without it, you are blind. Not only will you offend the wrong person, you will choose the wrong type to work on and will think you are flattering people when you are actually insulting them. Before embarking on any move, take that measure of your mark or potential opponent. Otherwise, you may waste time and make mistakes. Studying people's weaknesses, the chinks in their armor, the area of both pride and insecurity. Know their ins and outs before you even decide whether or not to deal with them. 2 final words of caution. First, In judging and measuring your opponent, never rely on your instincts. You make the greatest mistakes of all if you rely on such inexact indicators. Nothing can substitute for gathering concrete knowledge. Studying and spy on your opponent for however long it takes. This will pay off in the long run. Second, never trust appearances. Anyone with a serpent heart can use a show of kindness to cloak it, and a person with a blustery on the outside is often really a coward. Learn to see through appearances and their contradictions. Never trust the version that people give of themselves. It is utterly unreliable. The hunter, he does not lay the same trap for a wolf as for a fox. He does not set bait where no one will take it. He knows prey thoroughly. He hit its habits and hideaways and hunts accordingly. Be convinced that there are no person so insignificant and inconsiderable, but may sometime or other have it in their power to be of use to you, which they certainly will not if you have once shown them contempt. Wrongs are often forgiven, but contempt never is. Our pride remembers it forever.